Welcome to the Moments That Matter podcast. My name is Laura Escamilla. I am your host.
And I am your co-host, Isaac Escamilla.
And today we have two new friends of ours, Felipe Olivarez and Roman Silva. Both of them are assistant directors of financial aid for the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And today we're going to be discussing free application for federal student aid, which is better known as the FAFSA to most of us. Each year, students going to college should fill out the FAFSA to apply for federal grants, work study, and loans. We've discussed this in previous episodes. So today we're going to discuss all the changes that are happening with FAFSA, and we're going to ask our area gurus on all the changes, and hopefully we can clarify some things for parents. So first, I wanted to say that I work really closely with several universities throughout the state of Texas. And the one thing I hear most from colleagues is that when financial aid officers are talking, parents and students often feel like this school is the one that made up these regulations and these rules and these policies. And I wanted to put it out there to start that everything we're going to discuss has been outlined and given to you all. FAFSA is determined by the U.S. Department of Education. The schools, everybody dealing with FAFSA, we're all just going by the rules we're given and given the guidelines. So when parents and students are approaching financial aid offices, I just want them to know ahead of time, because this is a common thing that I hear, that you all aren't making the rules up. You're just following them, and you're going by the guidelines for your funding and going by the guidelines for all the things that you all have to work through, all the red tape. Have patience and be clear that whatever you say, they're not rules that you all, UTRGV is not making these rules, and you aren't determining what these things are. You're just dealing with the hand you've been dealt, essentially. Would that be accurate?
That's absolutely accurate.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So first, if you can just tell me the information you do have about the 24 and 2025 FAFSA, because what they're going to be filling out right now, or in December when it opens, will be for next academic school year. So students attending the school next year, if they're high school seniors right now or in college right now, we're talking about the 24-25 FAFSA. So tell me what you know about when it's going to be available.
Sure. I guess the first major update is that traditionally the FAFSA is available October 1st. So we're used to that. Most schools will always tell students, fill it out as quickly as possible on October 1st. This year, it's actually been moved to sometime in December. That's the first major update that's occurred. Sometime in December is actually the exact terminology we're getting from the Department of Education. And that's because of the amount of changes that are actually occurring with the FAFSA form itself. So sometime in December is what we're anticipating, and we're preparing for that.
And I don't know how long you have been with financial aid. I've been working with financial aid offices for my entire career in a nonprofit, which is 18 years. And this is the first time that changes of this magnitude have happened. I know we changed to October years ago, like the October deadline, but nothing really this substantial. Is that true? Or
No, you're absolutely right. The Department of Education, the changes that they've been making are completely changing everything. And I know we'll cover it in a minute, but getting rid of the estimated family contribution, the EFC, switching it to the student aid index, it's really going to change everything.
Okay. So it's been overwhelming. I've sat in all the webinars the U.S. Department of Education has had, trying to decipher what's really happening. For us as a scholarship organization, we take what used to be the EFC to determine financial need, just like the financial aid office does. So it's all a big learning process, and we're nervous about what that's going to look like because it's just unknown. And we have to prepare our application to open in January with this unknown information. I'm sure we're not the only ones in that boat. I'm sure you all are doing the same thing. So let's start with the FSA ID. Can we talk about what that is, who needs it, and if they don't have a Social Security to get it? Can you give me some information on that?
Sure. Yeah. So the FSA ID is your ID to submit the FAFSA application and to provide consent and verify that the information on the FAFSA application is correct. The people that are going to need to get an FSA ID, it's going to start off with the student and then the parents or the contributors. And we'll go into details of what a contributor is technically in a few, but ultimately student and parents, they're the ones that are going to need to apply for the FSA ID username, and then ultimately they will use that to log into the FAFSA to verify their information.
Two questions that come up for me. If a parent has already established an FSA ID with a child beforehand, this is not the first time doing FAFSA, they don't have to do anything new. They can use their old FSA ID?
Correct. Yes. And if a parent already has one from a previous child that they've used, that's going to stay the same.
Okay. And how about in our area, very common, the parent is not a U.S. citizen and they need to apply. They're still going to need an FSA ID.
Yes, they're still going to need it, but when the student initiates the FAFSA application, they're going to indicate who the contributors are, the parents. Is it a single parent, or is it parent married, or just maybe not married, but just cohabitating? When they indicate who that parent is, they're going to include the name, date of birth, and then social. If the parent does not have a social, they'll be able to check off that the parent does not have a social. And then it'll just ask for more details like a mailing address and most importantly, email address. That is how the Department of Education is going to try to determine the parent's identity if they don't have a social.
Okay. I did hear something, or I think one of the trainings that said that they're going to go through TransUnion, or I guess a different verification method for these parents. And that's probably just for the address and verifying their address.
Yes, so that's just another formal process to identify who the individual is since they're not utilizing the social. That is still an ongoing process that they're still trying
Right.
to provide guidance on. But yes, there
Yeah,
will
it seemed
be.
iffy, like they weren't
It's still
quite.
very much something new. Obviously, previously you were not able to create an FSA ID without the social. So this is a very new process in itself. But we're expecting prior to December that information will be released.
Okay, so let's go through what we're talking about, this role-based form. This is new. From what I understand, the student is a certain role, the parent is a certain role, and they're switching off the application and can't see what the other one put or the questions asked for the other person. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's actually fairly accurate. So it is a role-based form, and what that means is that the student will only see questions that pertain to the student, and then the parent will only see questions that pertain to the parent. What that's designed to do is hopefully make it a little bit easier experience for each individual. Previously, the FAFSA form was a very long form, over
Everybody
100
saw everything,
questions.
right?
Everyone saw everything. You had to be there together to do it. With this, it should hopefully relieve some of the anxieties or pressures that students do face, as they will only be seeing questions that pertain to them.
Yeah, and I can see that. We have 2 college students and we've been through this process years and years, aside from work, actually as parents filling it out. And yeah, it's long and you see all the students' information and all the parents' information and who's parent 1 and parent 2. And I can see how that would appear to be easier, but scary too, because you don't know what they're being asked. So let's talk a little bit about, I guess, the thing that is most confusing to me is who is filling out the FAFSA. What parent fills it out? There's a lot of, like you mentioned, are they divorced? What I needed clarification on is the parent who earns the most, if they're divorced, or the parent who gives the most, they're married or remarried. This all seems very complicated to me.
Yeah, it's definitely an adjustment from prior FAFSA forms. So there's different scenarios of who will fill out the form. Obviously, the student is going to be one that does have to fill out the form, and they will invite a contributor, and that individual hopefully will be a parent, right? As far as any event that a parent are divorced, separated, the question that's been coming up a lot is, who does the student put? Now, that particular question, it's going to be a little complex in some areas. Essentially, it would be the parent that contributes the most financially to the student. And in some cases, it may not necessarily be the parent that the student lives with.
Got it.
So that's going to be a big adjustment for some parents to figure out what that looks like. But we're hoping that they'll be able to sort that out, work it out, and then make that determination so they can identify who that parent would be.
So it's not necessarily the parent they're living with. It could be.
It may not necessarily. It could be.
It could be, but
it may not
it's not
necessarily.
100%. You live with this parent, this person fills it out. And for example, if mom and dad are divorced, they live with mom, but mom has remarried, then they're also going to use the stepdad's information too, if mom's determined to be the one who gives the most. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the same if they live with mom, but dad gives the most and dad is remarried, dads and stepmom have to fill out the information, right? Is that?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Yes. Big adjustment.
So stay married, folks. Don't complicate things.
I have a question from the audience.
Go for it.
Do we have to put in everybody? So this is a scenario. We have 2 parents that are both remarried and they all contribute to this child equally or as equal as possible. Do we put all of their information in?
That's 4 people. They have to pick
people
one, right?
I
are
feel
there.
like you actually answered your question because you said as equally as possible.
Okay.
So you've already identified that it may not be equal.
Okay.
In the eyes of the parents, they may feel it's equal, but we're talking about dollars, right? And dollars.
Okay. And also, who makes that determination? Does the student select what parent they're going to put on there?
Yes, families would make that determination.
Okay.
Hopefully with the guidance of their parents. Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Families would have been the appropriate word to say.
Yeah. So one of the plus sides that I can see is students are going to be able to list more colleges where they were limited before, and they're going to be able to list up to 20 schools that they can send their FAFSA to. I can't imagine applying to 20 schools, but it happens, right? This is a common thing. So that's one of the things that I saw as a plus that we can easily check off. This is more schools. Yay. So let's talk about the student aid index, because formally expected family contribution, an EFC score. This is what we use on our scholarship to determine financial need. And I am completely blown away with what an SAI is.
Yes, it is really complicated. And as far as how the Department of Education is calculating that SAI, we're not in those details yet. But ultimately, the student aid index, it's going to be something similar like the estimated family contribution. But the biggest differences are to determine Pell Grant eligibility. The student's either going to qualify for maximum Pell if they meet certain requirements, regardless of what the student aid index comes out to be. If they do not qualify for maximum Pell, then the student aid index is going to be subtracted from the maximum Pell eligibility to determine. So before, students would, based off of their UFC, they qualify for a range. If their UFC was between $500 and $599, they would qualify for a specific amount. Now it's actually going to be rounded down to the exact dollar. So if their student aid index is 371, it's going to be different for somebody that's 381. It's going to just make a slight difference there.
It's going to be a more detailed calculation
Right.
to the dollar, essentially. So if you qualified for 100 and you used to say, if you earned between $20 and $50, you get all 100, but now it's going to be, you earn 80 and you get 70, you get based on what that is.
Exactly. And then also the student aid index, before, if an estimated family contribution, if there's 2 students in college, brother, sister, so forth, the estimated family contribution would get split. On the student aid index, it does not get split. The siblings are going to have the exact same student aid index.
Guys, this is the part that kills me. It really does. This is going to be so hard for parents, and we'll talk a little more in depth than that. But as a mom of college students, I know lots of people with multiple kids in college. I just cannot comprehend how you can say that you have, because essentially if it's saying you have 10,000, you have 2 kids in college, before it's say you have 5,000 and 5,000. Now they're saying you have 20,000, 10,000 and 10,000. Is that right? Is that what I'm understanding?
I guess if you were to think about it that way, then yes. But because of the way the Department of Education is changing the calculation, it's going to allow a lot more families and students to actually qualify for Pell where they didn't actually qualify for it before under the old formula.
But
So
essentially it's saying that parents have more money than they do, or families have more money than they do if they have multiple kids, wouldn't it? If they have 2 kids in college and it's coming out that they have $10,000 to give for these 2 kids, if they're not considering that there's 2 kids in college, it seems unfair. And that's how it is changing. That is how it is. But it seems just feels unfair to me as a parent and somebody who has, and we know a parent who has triplets in school. That's hard. And we have a friend who has triplets that are in their 2nd year of college. And for the next 2 years, that's hard.
So this sounds very much like it's going to benefit someone who's Pell Grant eligible more than someone who has a family that does have a contribution to bring in. Am I understanding that correctly?
I guess what's really going to happen is, and unfortunately, we're really not going to see it until we start seeing the FAFSAs rolling in,
Right.
where we can actually compare apple to apples. Family, same household, same income. Last year, when they submitted their 23-24,
What that's going to look
what
like.
was their EFC? And then now let's look at it under the new 24-25 with the SAI. As per what the Department of Education has said, it's going to, since it's changing it, it's going to allow more people to qualify for Pell where they didn't qualify before. If their estimated family contribution was, say, under the old formula 10,000, under the SAI, it's going to be lower. Therefore, they should qualify for Pell. But
So ideal for someone on the border of Pell Grant eligibility, usually, and they're the only kid in college. Most likely they could be in a situation where they receive Pell Grants. I can
Right.
see how that is beneficial. But again, when you have multiple students, and not even have to be multiple siblings, I know it asks how many people in your family are in college. It used to ask. In that case, my son's in college, but I'm also in college for a doctorate degree. So it used to consider that, but now it doesn't, right? It doesn't matter. So
Right, because the number of college, it's still included in the FAFSA if you go through the demo.
it's
Well,
just not calculated.
it's not calculated for that student aid index.
Right.
Mhm.
And again, my previous starting message, you all aren't the ones creating the system. So I realize that this part seems unfair. And I'm sure there's reasoning behind it. I've read a lot of background information on it's not fair to so-and-so parent that, or
Mhm.
this family that they planned out their kids properly to not overlap or whatever. There's reasoning somewhere in there, obviously, to get this approved. This is just me vocalizing to the world of podcasts, the podcast world, that it's unfair. The SAI, though, if somebody has applied to FAFSA before, they would know that the lowest, if they qualified for Pell Grant, would be 0. But now it's going to go into negative numbers. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's one of the weirdest parts about the SAI is how is this negative number going to actually
So do we owe you more
fix
money?
it?
We'll
Yeah.
pay you more to come to school, essentially. So that's all a learning process. I guess we
Right.
will start to figure that out. Again, as I mentioned, our scoring process for our scholarship application is up in the air because we use this EFC number to calculate need, and we don't know what that looks like. So I'll let you off the hook with that.
On a positive side, though, on that change, I feel that it will relieve a lot of anxiety and pressure from some families because EFC, the name itself, expected family contribution,
Mm-hmm.
was always a little scary for some families. Just speaking for myself, I would just assume, not working in financial aid, just assume, oh, is that what I'm supposed to pay? Because
Mhm.
it's expected family contribution. So I think just the name itself, SAI, is a little bit more appropriate and might encourage people to actually apply for the FAFSA.
Right. And
I agree with that completely.
Yeah.
I always thought when I was younger, that's exactly like if my EFC was this, then I'm expected to have that money available, or my family is. And I wasn't. I was a Pell Grant student when I was an undergraduate. I'm so grateful. But I was really afraid that I wasn't going to be able to go because
Right.
there
I was
some
expected
money.
to bring something to the table that I did not have.
And I definitely had that same fear when I was in college
Yeah.
as well. Definitely, I feel it is a good positive change, just the name itself.
Yeah, I can see that. Thank you for bringing a silver lining
Yes,
to,
of course. We had to
the
bring one
For the Pell
conversation.
Grant guys like myself.
So the other thing that is big, because we do have a lot of, at least I know a lot of parents when I do presentations to students and parents about the scholarship, and it is required that FAFSA be filled out for our scholarship application. And similar, we have a partnership with UT RGV. Similarly, it has to be in your system too when they're scholarship recipients and that kind of thing. And a lot of high schools require students to fill out FAFSA as part of graduation requirements. But a lot of parents are hesitant because they have to provide income information, personal information. And one of the biggest things that caught my attention was that they must consent to pulling their tax information from the IRS, right? It used to be an option. And for me, I loved it. I don't have to think about anything. I don't have to go pull out my forms to figure out what was happening. I could just say, yeah, pull it because it's there. They have it. It's the same entity. It's the government. Like they know everything. So if they have my tax information, it just seemed easier to me. It really did. That is a feature that I appreciated because I didn't have to go look for the information. And I didn't realize, like I said, until I talked to more parents, that they don't do it because they don't want that pulled. They rather fill it all in, and now it must be pulled. Is that correct?
It definitely needs to be pulled. When the student invites the parent to provide their information and then the parent logs in with their FSA ID
The
to
contributor.
the
then?
contributor, as soon as they log in, they have to acknowledge. They have to give that consent. Yes, I agree that I'm going to provide my information to Sally so that way she can
Mhm.
qualify for financial aid. And then after they verify the information, it'll ask them one more time, we're going to pull your information.
Mhm.
Do you give consent? If they say no, a pop-up comes up and is going to inform them that Sally is not going to be eligible for
Right.
financial aid.
It's going to be considered incomplete,
Right.
right? Which is, like I said, as a parent, it made life easier for me, but there are a lot of people who are hesitant to do that. And is that the case for you all? Do you see that on the financial aid side?
Yes, we do see that, but I would encourage parents and or families in general just not to be hesitant about that. It's a very secure process, and in itself, what it will do is hopefully limit the amount of verifications that we usually have. I know one
Mhm.
big one that we've received in the past is some parents maybe do not have any income or they did not file a tax return, and we request a verification of non-tax filers form.
Mhm.
That can be a tedious process to get from the IRS, but now that won't be necessary
Because they're
anymore
going to verify
because we're going to verify that information through that.
that there was nothing filed.
So it'll definitely make the process a little bit easier in doing so.
Another silver lining. There we go. That's another
Well,
positive.
I think it's designed to make the job of the financial aid office easier in processing, right? Because you're not having to verify information. And as the scholarship early on when I started, we used to have the student fill out their earned hours and their GPA, and then their transcript would come in, and we would see that it was not the same. So we removed that, and now we input that information based on their official transcript. I imagine that happens in financial aid, right? They're filling in some data and then it's not matching somewhere. And the financial aid office has to go through we call it CSI scholarship, but CSI financial aid to figure out what's accurate information,
What's correct and what's incorrect.
right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
this would alleviate that process, right?
Correct.
Because the government's saying they had this much or they didn't. And I think I understood, if it's correct, that the number of dependents in a family, all of this will be based on the taxes, like what they put, the number of people in a family, it'll be pulled from there, whatever they put in their taxes.
Yes, it's going to be pulled from there, but the parent does actually still have the option to update the number of dependents if it actually differs than what was put on the tax return.
If a parent is filing as the contributor, but they had no income, right? So they're just going to go ahead and verify that they did not file, I assume, pull that information. Will it ask them if they filed or not filed anymore? Because it used to ask that.
That's a great question. I don't believe it will. I
It'll
believe they're
just,
just
they'll give
consenting for the
approval and
information to
then
get pulled.
it'll pull and
Right.
there's nothing kind of
Right.
thing.
Right.
And I do feel like this from the webinars that it pushed more towards the school, though, for you all to determine case by case basis, whether dependent, independent, and those kind of students that apply. I don't know if you all have a lot that are 18, 19 saying that they're independent of their parents or not, but that aspect did push that to the schools to determine case by case. Is that correct?
The school does have the ability, depending on different circumstances that
Right.
students may have. Obviously, in those cases, it'd be recommended to meet with a financial aid advisor.
So
that we can
if they
guide them.
don't have parents to fill out as a contributor, they should contact financial aid for the school that they're going to be attending to help through that process. What if both their parents are saying, we're not going to fill this out?
So if both parents, if the student invites both parents to submit the FAFSA, because that's what they have to do, and then both parents end up declining or denying the consent, what might end up happening, and this is the part where we don't know exactly how this is going to happen, but typically in the old process, we would still get the FAFSA information, but it would just indicate that it was rejected. There's nothing else that we could do unless the student came in and explained, this is the reason why my parents did not provide. And I'm assuming that part is still going to be the same because that's where we can go in the process of what's called a professional judgment. If there's anything that we can do to either classify a dependent student as independent, or are we going to need to proceed with processing the FAFSA application without parent consent? And is the availability, and now I'm asking this question to Roman because I don't remember if they've actually changed this. Have you heard if their students still going to be able to do an unsubsidized with parent consent?
So that part we still have
Don't know
not
what they
received
could do.
guidance on. We'll hopefully have an answer for that soon.
So you're saying that if somebody was in that situation previously, they could at least get a loan, an unsubsidized loan part. They just didn't get the Pell Grants and that kind of thing.
Unfortunately, I have this little person behind me telling me that no, that was actually going to be off the table now.
Okay.
If the parent not
is it?
provide consent, then
And
that's it.
they're ineligible, right?
That is one of the things I did a presentation for Region 1, right? And it was a Zoom presentation and parents could type in their questions and they'd be like, what if we don't want to fill this out? Or what if we don't want to borrow money? And I kept typing in, without you filling out the FAFSA, your student will not get financial aid. Without you filling out the FAFSA, your student will not get financial aid. And it was over and over. I imagine that from your side, that happens a lot, right? That the parent just doesn't want to help their kids, or is it that they're scared to fill it out What do you feel is that barrier
I think the barrier might just be just a misunderstanding of what
is
the
happening?
FAFSA is or what actually happens. They're not committing to anything.
Mm,
So there should really be no fear towards that
right,
or actually applying for a FAFSA. There's more opportunity within it.
right.
And again, it goes back to just changing the terminology, changing those words, keywords, because maybe that was what was confusing parents. And overall, the FAFSA form itself is going to be more simplified, more streamlined. So hopefully it won't be as intimidating because I felt that the FAFSA form previously was a very intimidating form,
Right.
had numerous questions that sometimes we would be a little reluctant to share or we didn't know how to share. And obviously, coming from experience as a student, that's how I felt.
And I do feel there's a lot of, and we can address misconceptions about FAFSA that I tell, like I said, when I present, a lot of parents will be like, we don't qualify for financial aid, so we're not filling out the FAFSA. It's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. And I go into discussions about, for one, if you're offered loans and you don't want them, decline them. There's nothing's going to happen. If you don't want it, don't take it. If you've been offered financial aid and you don't want it, don't take it. If you're offered work study and you don't want it, don't take it. You can decline whatever's being offered. There is no harm. However, if they don't fill it out and they find their financial situation changes from when they fill it out in October to August the following year that their kid goes to school and they need the loan, they can't get it because there's no FAFSA on file.
Correct.
So that is always the misconception that I fight too, because they're like, oh, we're not going to apply for the scholarship because you require FAFSA. I get that a lot. I'm like, just fill out the FAFSA. It doesn't hurt you. It doesn't hurt anybody. The information gets sent to the school. If they offer you something and you don't want it, just don't take it, decline it.
Right.
That's a common thing.
What you said there about the FAFSA not being a commitment, I think that is a huge misunderstanding among people, especially because it's a government document, right? So you're going in there, you're giving them your personal information, your tax information. It very much feels like you are committing to contribute something to your child's education, that you're on the hook for it, so to speak. And that's a huge misconception. And I think that's part of the barrier to entry for people filling out the
Right.
FAFSA for your scholarship as well, just because they're just afraid that if they fill this out, they're somehow committing to something. And I love that you said that there is no commitment to filling out the FAFSA. It can only help you, not hurt you. So maybe that's something, that language, we need to reiterate that language, that this is not a commitment. This is more of a discovery. Anything else?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Definitely.
Yeah. And I think it's just to streamline the process, right? Because there is no way with, what is your enrollment at UTRGV?
I know we're, I want to say at the beginning of the fall, we're just above 31,000.
Yeah, I was going to say 30,000 range. There's no way for a financial aid office to go case by case for 30,000 students. This is, the FAFSA is intended to be a streamlined process to help get everybody through the system easier. And same thing with applying to college. There is Apply Texas and there's all these other things to streamline it for schools, because there's no way you can go case by case for every student's situation. And if they need help at some point, whatever that is, whether it's an emergency loan or if it's a loan in general or a Pell Grant or a scholarship or any of these things, that can't happen without the FAFSA. That's just the truth, right? I mean,
Sure. Well, with the exception of the emergency loan, they can apply for that without the FAFSA because that's just a short-term loan that the university offers.
that they have to pay through the semester, right?
Right.
These are just, like I said, it seems like a no-brainer if your kid's going to college. As like I said, a parent of college students, that's the first thing that I have on my calendar: renewal, October 1st, apply for FAFSA. And then this year it popped up and I was like, ooh, I don't know when to readjust, because we have a son who's a second year in college that I'm going to have to fill it out at some
We
point.
will. We're going to have to. Also, I did not realize that the enrollment at UTRGV was, this
Had
is a
grown.
very large institution. UTRGV is huge. That's a lot of students.
And
And
we're definitely growing.
From when we were students.
sure. And this is a tool that allows you to facilitate these funds for these students. So it should be embraced.
Let's circle back a little bit to the application. I know one of the changes is that for families that own small businesses or own a farm, that those are going to be counted as assets. Is that what I understood? Like that information?
Yes. So on the FAFSA application, there's going to be a couple of questions as far as the checking account balance. But of course, that's after all bills are paid, whatever's left over. And then there's investments and then business value if it's a farm or so forth. But it's always looking at the net value. So I think a lot of times, at least when I've helped out students, and this is going back from before, whenever it came down to the business value, they didn't know. The student's not going to need to answer that question. The parent is. And then ultimately, when they end up answering that question, it's what's the net worth of it? Whatever the business is worth minus all owed debt, that's the value. Now, how that's going to affect the student aid index, that part,
Still don't know, right?
Do not know.
If that's just information they're gathering for giggles or or if it's
Yeah.
going to have a substantial
Yeah,
impact.
I'm assuming that at some point, yes, it is going to end up affecting them. I guess it's going to come down to overall income, household size.
Like I said, I've sat in and I've been in several presentations. Just recently, I was in Weslaco and they did a presentation to their parents about this, talking about the things parents can do now to prepare for whenever the date is that it opens, that FAFSA opens. So the first thing that they mentioned was that the parent, which I guess I take for granted or assume everybody has, set up has an email address. So if parents don't have an email, they should establish that already. And they're going to use their 2022 taxes. Is that correct for the FAFSA?
Yes, that's correct.
So they should know that going in and then establishing the FAFSA ID. In my understanding, they can go in now and establish a FSA ID.
Yes, they can. Parents that do have a social can go ahead and establish their FSA ID already. If they do not have a social, they
They're gonna have to
technically
wait.
have to wait for the application to open up.
Okay, so if they have a social, they can start doing that so it's all ready to go. If they've had an FSA ID previously, start looking for your password or recover the password.
Which we all know is a
it-
difficult process sometimes.
Yes, from experience, absolutely. They can do that now. And the other questions I had were if the student loan limits were going to change. Right now, there is a limit of if they're a first year, they can borrow this much, second year, third year. Does that look like it's changing at all? That I haven't seen anything on it, but I don't know what happens on that side.
Yeah, as of right now, no, the loan limits are still going to be the same. Entering freshmen, if they're dependent, can borrow up to $5,500 between subsidized and unsubsidized. Sophomores, that limit's going to go up, and then juniors and
Every year
seniors,
it goes
right.
up a little bit.
If they're independent students, same thing. It's still all the same.
Okay, great. And if they fill out this new application and they filled out something incorrectly, do they contact FAFSA for that, Department of Education, or they'd go to the school, to the financial aid office to make changes after it's been submitted? Both?
Previously, whenever a student submitted their FAFSA, they were able to go back in and make any corrections. And sometimes that would end up hurting the student because then they would get selected for verification
Mm-hmm.
after they've gone through the award process.
Mhm.
And now we're needing to verify, okay, the changes you made now completely changed everything. So now we're going to need to verify your information. Under this new process, this new FAFSA application, we're assuming that if the income tax information, since it's being pulled directly from the IRS, the students, the parents are not going to be able to manipulate that. As of right now, the only information they're technically entering is their residency, their address, email, phone number.
Easy enough to change, right?
And then as far as the
Their
parents,
schools.
right, the schools, and the parents are only going to change the number of dependents if they need to. And if there's anything that they need to correct, like in instances where maybe one of the parents lost a job and now there's a loss in income,
Mhm.
that's going to be directly with the school to do process what's considered professional judgment, loss of income, things like that. So ultimately, if they submit their FAFSA, if the information is already at the school, go to your school to see how those changes could basically
So if
be made.
anything major changes with the financial situation down the line, then contact the school that they're going to make those assessments. Okay. Did I miss anything?
Let me see. It's like all parents out there, we're also still learning. As soon as we hear something that Federal Student Aid is putting out, any webinars, and obviously we're signing up. They do have some useful webinars, YouTube videos available on YouTube.
Mhm.
They can be a little lengthy, about 59 minutes or
Mhm,
so,
mhm.
but they're there and they can serve as a resource, at least for right now. And I would say the only other thing is if there are any parents that have their students that are graduating, maybe they're graduating early in December or finishing in May and they want to start in the summer, they're still going to need to submit the 2023-2024
Ooh,
FAFSA.
that's good information.
Because depending on the school that they're attending, summer is considered either a trailer or a header. Trailer meaning it's the end of the academic year. Header, it's going to be the start. So for UTRGV, since it's our trailer, anybody that wants to start in June we're basing their financial aid off of their 2023-2024 FAFSA, which is still the
Understood.
old application, the old process.
So students graduating in December, they want to go to school in June for the first summer session. They need to now fill out the 23-24 FAFSA. And then in December, the 24-25.
Right.
Okay, that's good information to have. Any advice for parents, since I have you here with Financial Aid Office, and I am predominantly scholarships, do you have any advice for parents? Students are starting to get accepted to schools, reviewing financial aid packages, and all those things that go into deciding on if you're going to go to school at that school or not. Any advice you have for parents as they're looking for things, or is anything negotiable? I read that a lot. I follow a parent page and they're like, contact the school. This is too much. Contact the school. They'll fix it. And I never thought those things were negotiable. Or is it negotiable? Is your financial aid package negotiable?
So the amount that a student receives in Pell Grant student loans, those limits are set. Unless there's a loss of income where we can change that eligibility because we're changing the EFC or the student aid index, that's set in stone. Where contacting the school might help is scholarship opportunities that maybe something new came up that wasn't offered before. If the student is flagged as a non-resident and they're having to pay out-of-state tuition, little things like that maybe the student answered something wrong on their admissions application, so they're being considered a non-Texas resident. So their tuition is almost 3 times as much. If anything just doesn't look right, then at that point, of course, the student should be the one contacting the school
Right.
because of FERPA, the university might not be able to provide all the details other than general knowledge.
Even though parents are paying the bill, they still do not have access to. Being as a parent. Yeah.
But the student can get consent to
Okay.
access records.
That's interesting because I only have been given consent to pay bills, not to go in and look at things. We still have to do the 2-step authentication.
Yeah.
Be ready. What are you going in for? What are you looking for? Just approve it. I need to go in and look. But to pay a bill, I have all authorization to do so.
Full
So,
access
full
to pay
access
bills.
to pay bills.
We'll take your money.
Yes. And I imagine it's like that at most schools. I'm not putting it on anybody. Okay, gentlemen, anything else that I forgot? It was really enlightening. Like I said, it's hard when you're looking at these webinars just to make sure that the information you're taking in is what everybody else is taking from it. So it's nice to get another perspective from a school because you all have a lot on the line to learn about all this stuff.
The only other bit of advice, apply early.
As soon as
Submit
you
your
can.
FAFSA as soon as possible because where programs like Pell Grant, student loans, that money's readily available, doesn't technically get exhausted. Any additional aid that the university can offer, the institutional funds, that's the funding that's limited. If a student submits their FAFSA, gets it in as early as possible, they're going to maximize their chances of qualifying for the most that they can get.
That's great because UTRGV, you offer tuition guaranteed and a lot of different programs depending on income. So that is all contingent on
Right.
funds, resources being available.
Right.
Good information. to
That
have.
is good advice. And thank you guys for your due diligence by listening in on these 59-minute webinars and taking notes. That really does affect our community and our students. And it's really going to help them out when it's time because it's upon us. It's about to happen.
And I sat in too, but I think I was more upset than taking notes. I'm like, what? What is this? But yes, it's happening whether we approve or like it or not. These are all changes that are going to happen.
Absolutely. Definitely.
So right now there is, in case yourself or any parents haven't noticed, there is an aid estimator off of studentaid.gov
Okay.
where parents can right now, even though the FAFSA is not open for 24-25, this is actually already live and they can just answer the general questions, estimated AGI, number of household, residency, and it'll give them an estimate as far as what their financial aid eligibility will be.
Okay. Studentaid.gov.
Yes, studentaid.gov/aid-estimator.
Okay. So just to get an idea of what you'll be looking at. And
Thank you.
And another opportunity for them not to feel so afraid to actually take the step of completing that FAFSA form.
Definitely. Yeah. And I do have some personal friends whose daughters and sons may be graduating in December. And what you mentioned earlier about having to fill out the current version of FAFSA is super important because they might not have realized that. They might be waiting because we've been asked
Everybody's
to
told.
wait. So that's really important news. And the difference between a trailer for the year and a header. Yeah, I do know some universities, yes, where June is the beginning of the following school year. So they run a little bit differently. So it's important to take note depending on what school you're going to. great information.
Thank you so much, Roman, Felipe. I really appreciate your time.
Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll have you back at the start of the year once everything has been in full swing and we can get some additional information if people have questions.
Right, and you can compare apples to apples at that point, right?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Great.
It was a
Thank you so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you.